Fly. Nah, just go over to games, my music. Minimize that. Interesting song to start off on, okay. Oh. Hello there, my name is Flicker and welcome to my daily recordings. We're probably going to be getting the same stuff as usual done. Though, frankly, I'm not exactly sure where my mood is sitting tonight. Kinda just... meh. Day turned out well, I got some stuff done, but... I don't know. Feels like I didn't quite get things to go as I wanted. Then again, if things went as I wanted all the time, life would be boring, no? Oh... Besides, that's control freak territory. So how would I want to phrase it then, so that way I walk away from that territory while still acknowledging my feelings and the space they're in? I don't feel like I accomplished the objectives I set out to do today, but at the same time I still feel like I got some nice stuff done today. There was the usual stream of Refantasio, of which I am loving the story of. Bird. I guess there's a sense of helplessness from how I don't have much of an impact on the world around me yet, but that's more of a thing that I can't change on my own, and if I were to focus on trying to change that, I would just end up miserable. Yeah. So I think the best thing to focus on is just trying to grow as a person and do my part where I can without necessarily dedicating my entire life to it. And for some people that might look like going out and helping the local community, but for others, and me personally, it looks like staying out of people's way, trying to be considerate of their day and what they're dealing with, while also thanking them for the time and effort they put into their job and work. I don't care if you're working at a grocery store or fucking strip mall. Frankly speaking, I still think your efforts impact other people's day, so thank you for putting up with the entire hell zone of customers. Oh, come on! Da ba da 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 ba da 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 ba da da da. Da 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 ba da 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 da. Because if it weren't for people working their day-to-day lives and jobs, people who go out and fight to protect our country and home wouldn't have a country and home to return to. People who just go about their daily lives getting their shit done and having their place in the world, even if it's just a boring and mundane job, are still people contributing to the stability and foundation of this country. Of any country. To dismiss their efforts would be to ultimately undermine the foundation and stability of any system around it. Let things be there for the people, without necessarily enabling those who would simply seek power. And so we get to the point where it's like, okay, so who should get power? Who should make votes and all that? And it's like, for as much as I want to say the people should, I'm not sure I fully agree. Because to make decisions on someone else's life when it doesn't impact you is kind of where we've ended up at. Okay, so I guess I'm in a serious and contemplative mood tonight. Noted. Is kind of how we've ended up where things are currently at, with social power plays and dynamics corrupting and interfacing with the intended political process to the point where what was intended isn't what's happening. So how do you account for that? How do you account for that in a system structure such that the people are still given the chance to make choices, and they do still have delegates who represent them in making those choices? But we also have it so that way voices and choices, the votes themselves, are not just blind votes based on personal beliefs, but on practical evidence. Well, for as much as I would like it to be as simple as that, the reality is you then have to get into the moral quandaries of things, and that's a whole can of worms in and of itself. Which is why no one's willing to touch the issue with a 10-foot pole or any new ideas. They just like to rehash the same old ideas for whatever fits their agenda. Which I can understand and it makes sense, but it's disappointing. And you can't come at it from a purely scientific angle, because then you're just ultimately losing the point of a heart within all the information you receive. And that can easily end up manipulated anyways. Hope you have a good time. I'm gonna try and snag this black butterfly. Nah, I got the black butterfly. I am out. And then conversely, how do you support the people without necessarily enabling them such that they become spoiled, rotten children who don't know how to fucking defend the foundation of their country? Because that is a cycle that happens time and again throughout civilization. And it can either make or break a country, make or break a governmental system. Nope. And what about being fed false data from a distance when you need to rely on that data in order to make decisions that actually have positive impacts? How do you prevent malicious corruption and overall incompetence from causing decay of the system structure's integrity? Hey! And purpose. Hey! Because when the USA was founded, it was the Constitution was drafted with the intent to prevent such corruption from happening again. But of course, it didn't. Of course, because things get hazy over time and the original intentions aren't translated over and over again relative to the words that were used back in the time, you ultimately get people interpreting documentation and rule sets in ways that may be more present to the current times, but may not actually be what the original intentions were. And how do you tell the difference between when the original intentions are good enough or when they need to be modified in order for the health of a country? And again, you have to keep all of that in mind while accounting for the corruptive influence of social dynamics, which are inherent to human culture in many different ways, such that you inherently have to such degree that not including them in your considerations can ultimately lead to massive detriment in the long run. And that's not to mention the malicious people, but the bigger story is the incompetent people. Because the malicious people will at least understand and try to manipulate the structure in a way that leaves it stable and reliable enough for their ends. The incompetent people are going to be trying to make the structure fit what they want without actually understanding how to properly do so, and thus they just cause massive damage to the stability of any system or structure that exists to serve a function. And if you don't want to deal with customers who yell for hours on end or leverage their financial resources to yell insults into your company's ear about X is not working or Y is not working, when there must be a difference between what you're doing and what they're doing, and they're not listening to you at all, then ultimately it makes for an awkward situation where it's like, okay, what the fuck should I do then? Delicious. So ultimately, one of the foundational issues that plagues any country is resource and energy management. Not just in ways that are static relative to a workforce that follows your whim, but that are dynamic due to the current perspectives and shifting opinions of the public. How do you nurture a public such that it supports its country instead of just being ungrateful for the things that country provides? And is it even possible to do so in the first place? A lot of people would tell you flat out, the idealistic idea is good, but the practical reality is too complicated to really create any new insights on. And to that I say, that's fair, but that's using what we know and what we've tried. We need to try new things and try different things in order to see what works. We can't do it at the point of at the point of pointless, to the degree of it, to the degree in which people's lives are pointlessly risked. But at the same time, we also can't account for perfect conditions or those who are willing to work with us 100%. Hence why even if a human wants to think they can solve things, someone at the scale of a human life, ultimately, if they don't have a broad branching of connections throughout different categories and understandings of people's ways of life, then ultimately they're not going to be able to solve, contain, or react to issues appropriately. So how do you account for power plays? How do you account for incompetent, overgrown children who just want things to go their way? And then how do you account for misunderstandings that could ultimately cause natural decay through different variables and noise interfering? Unintended results and conclusions inching their way into the system throughout and over time. And some people would say perfect preservation is the answer, but personally speaking, that's not a dynamic option. It doesn't leave you able to acknowledge new ideas or new situations relative to the current circumstances and what you know. It only leaves you able to reference things relative to what you know and what you've already experienced, which, as has been proven in history and time all over and over and over again, isn't really enough in the long term. But we also need something that responds appropriately in the short term, while making sure that there's a lot of conditions that need to be met in order to form a stable society. There's the easy and quick way of doing it, but ultimately that's for the sake of progress, and so that should be its own sector and output. Just like how archiving and otherwise can be its own sector and output, but if you divide things, then ultimately you'll have misunderstandings and common perceptions that ultimately decay the system from within. Thanks you for your help. Well, that didn't work out in the way I wanted, but things seldom do. Anyways. You have to find a way to balance paradoxes against themselves such that it becomes a self-stabilizing feedback loop even against the noise of active living and the rate of decay which can afflict things. However, if you try to negate decay entirely, then ultimately you will leave a stagnation of available resources that leaves you unable to move forward after a certain point. So you can't get rid of decay, but decay does need to be so decay needs to be accounted for, but it shouldn't be blindly enabled. Hence why, for as much as people discount degeneracy and all of its stuff as harmful, it does have its proper place in the workings of things. Which leaves me wondering why there's a part of me that sees it and it still is kind of judgy in its own right. Because that could be, like, pre-laid biases and/or conditioning that's just influencing me passively. And if that gets in the way, then that's not going to be of much help to me. And then how do you prevent disconnection from the foundation and the substance of the structure? Because if you're not in tune with it, then ultimately you're not addressing the needs of it effectively or accurately enough to respond to threats and or problems in time. And that can be interfered with by power plays and otherwise, which then creates the dynamic system where people are protected in order to make the decisions for us, but at the same time, in that protection, they also may end up being left with giant egos that make them feel like they're better than other people, or that isolate them socially from the ground network and the rest of the structure. We don't want people who have a blindly specific view of anything. We want people who can dynamically work together for the sake and the health of any system that people rely on. So there's that. Fucking stop that. Stop that right now. And then even if you do account for all that, how do you account for people who, well, even if you do account for like ways in which those who operate and are becoming a part of the system via jobs, how do you make sure that how do you make sure that the system itself doesn't get invaded or corrupted? That's the point in which robustness is more of a priority than efficiency, because endless efficiency isn't going to last in dynamic circumstances. And if everything's the same, then when something happens and people don't know what to do, they're not going to have any other options to turn to. Capitalism is great for progress-oriented growth and the discovery of new things, but it is not necessarily great in meeting... It is, but it isn't. Because in having the whole volume and body of something come to a consensus on certain decisions and decisions that need to be made, then ultimately you've got issues. I don't know. It's really complicated to think about, because in a sense you can view a social structure and government system as an organism that needs to be able to sustain and defend itself from invaders and or viruses that would seek to just misuse that system for their own propagation without contributing to the legacy of that system. And how do you make sure that people don't end up attached to the idealizations of legacies and ideologies as opposed to the factual reality of what does and doesn't work? Because perspectives are needed just as much as everything else. Ba-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. 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 Okay. Would have required a bit more fanciness for me. A bit more finesse, not fanciness, for me to actually achieve taking down this entire plant by myself. But that's experience I don't yet have, and that's because I lack the necessary experience in order to have a built skill set that's fully set up for such things. Accelerant, catalyst. For as much as some people would like those titles, I would say they're not useful ones. Especially when they set off without your help, without fucking... and you don't want them to. Because if a body and system, if any government or structure fails to properly manage its resources, then ultimately it's going to die. Out and suffer, and the people will suffer too. Hell, the people will suffer long before the government or body itself suffers, and thus keeping things at above a baseline level of just okay is the priority. However, how do you keep from malicious people tricking children and or immature adults into trying to undermine and subvert stable and useful structures for their own gain? It's ultimately reflects back onto maturity and the proper raising of people, so that way they can be healthy even in unhealthy situations. Because if you're only healthy in healthy situations, then ultimately that means when you finally run into an unhealthy situation and you get consumed by the dynamic of such a thing, you're left without the usual tools that would be available to you. And or sometimes those tools break down under the weight and or emotional pressure of such things. In order to make good of leaving off this planet without having any consequences, we need to be able to effectively manage and secure not only our own resources as a planet, but also the stability of people's lives without necessarily enabling them into the worst of themselves. Which means you ultimately need, like, some kind of parent to be watching over, but at the same time, most leaders that would be effective parents aren't going to be able to last in the long run due to social biases and misunderstandings. It's how we've ended up where we're at. And if you have someone that rules for a very long time, it's just unsustainable. Hell, our human bodies could be considered an effective template of how certain things can work, so long as there's a central core and purpose throughout the structure. On the smaller scale, you'll have individual leaders that maintain the strength of the body and cellular structure, while up in the brain you have decision makers who ultimately rely on the body's current state in order to ensure that they're going to be able to make the right decisions. And if there's a disconnect between the two, then you get mental health and emotional and physical problems. What we need right now is not a specialist of an existing field, but a specialist of a new field that is able to incorporate and work with other pre-existing fields in multiple dynamic and different ways, such that they can address the concerns of the people, without necessarily ignoring the challenges and flaws of existing system structure. Is the whole reason why health networks and otherwise, why various industries around the world have to run safety checks of certain kinds and ask for your information repeatedly over time when things haven't changed and there's no indication in your life that they would have changed, is exactly because of those threats that would then seek to decay and misuse not only the resources of the structure and the system manages, but also the structure and the system itself to other ends. So fundamentally it's about connecting with and understanding people such that you can arrange them in ways that help to benefit structural integrity, even if that doesn't mean you necessarily understand every single inch of them. Make sure that they have at least a semi-positive impact as opposed to a negative one. And then how do you do that responsibly without necessarily playing with people's lives? Because that's when you really have to worry about manipulators and those who are apathetic and completely disconnected from the emotional impact and weight of life, running in and just trying to get their own goals done while pleasing the surface structure, the surface substance, and looking like they're prioritizing the strength of the system when really they've got their own priorities in mind. What kind of central core and substance do you need in order to create a positive output consistently on the surface, without necessarily creating negative backlash underneath within the system structure? In that way, we have to find a way to balance idealism with practicality, to balance system structure with organic life, to balance decay with growth and growth with decay. Here. Also, how do you prevent hollow and/or malicious or simply stupid people from unintentionally or maybe even intentionally taking out those who would provide security and structure to the system by prioritizing the people? How do you keep corruption from making its way into the system as an influence that seeks to only get what it wants and nothing more? Because then you get to the point where you have to worry about concepts themselves influencing things rather than just physical little details. Ooh. Hmm. No, that's not the way to do it. Down to 5. Barely. Barely got that one. Yeah, that's the point in which I leave. And believe you me, I'm not contemplating this stuff because I actually intend to take action. No, that's not practical. If I were in a position to take such action, I think I would have done so already. But rather, I'm hoping that in contemplating these things and leaving it as a public recording, it can help make the way forward for those who would actually be able to handle and deal with the problems they're facing. Even if that's it long after I'm fucking dead. Relive a spirit's memories. Because, practically speaking, there will always be those who don't contribute to any system structure and or society in the ways that we would hope, because they're simply seeking to live a practical life. And if you were to try and exclude them entirely from any system, then they're going to feel betrayed and just start working even harder to undermine it instead of passively undermining it over time. And the fact that human bodies work at all is a fucking miracle. I'm gonna be real. Heyo, Dark Dragon, what up, you silly bitch? Blah, 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 blah. Besides, if I were to be one taking actions on things, then ultimately I would then be unable to properly observe where things are at and come to clear conclusions on it. You cannot remain completely isolated from what's happening, but you also cannot take an active participant in it if you are wishing to get clean, accurate results from what you're trying to study. Upon being observed, there are some things in life that upon being observed change their reactions. That's the same for molecules, so why can't it be the same for social dynamics and people? It's not with the intent to do harm, but more so just a result of, oh hey, things are different. What the fuck? How did I not get seen there? Hold on. The ability to negate one's own energy and noise when trying to observe things is necessary if one is seeking to learn. And that's just a reality. But that's not the reality when it comes to social dynamics. When it comes to social dynamics, the ability to express your own energy is just as required as the ability to silence your own energy. So it's a dynamic contrast, then, between studying fields and possibilities and studying social dynamics. And the social dynamics that influence governmental and structural systems are ultimately part of what happens. You can't dismiss them without ignoring real data that ultimately would be part of solving the problem. Because if you can't identify the problem clearly and recognize it at a glance, then you are not able to solve it. You are solving for an imposter of it. You're looking for the next best thing to a solution. And in some situations that's okay, but temporary fixes are the most permanent. Purpose, planning, preparation, presentation, execution. If there's one thing I know, it's that going faster is not just about gaining and keeping momentum, it's about managing your momentum relative to your environment. And that's the reason why I fucking panicked in the situation where I did, because my emotional momentum had been building up way too much, and it was out of my hands in ways I wasn't comfortable with. And that was just at the start. Don't even tell me about the end. Ugh. And if people are going to wait on me to solve their problems for them, then I'm not going to fucking do it. Because that would be me being taken advantage of, which is annoying. Well, that didn't work out. They're leaving. Problem solving isn't just about the end result, it's about the impacts you make along the way, too. Fuck. Oh. Got them. They got me thinking that they hold my key, but I can pick a lock. Watch me. They're gonna do their own thing. Fucking ow! Oh my goodness. Whatever. Someone's hoping I'll keep solving their problems for them. I'm going to be disappointed. That's just the fact of it. Because at that point, I'm not helping anyone grow, and I'm getting taken for granted. But if you never have a positive impact and help people, then your reputation is never going to grow and problems aren't going to be solved. Especially if you wait for someone else to actually solve their own problems. That's much more inefficient. So how do you account for both without necessarily ignoring either? No, those are regular moths. Hmm. Fuck. Well, it would have worked, given time and the right inputs. Oh well. Anytime I get into deep thought like this, I also end up needing to drink more water for some reason. Don't know why, but it seems to be consistent. My best guess is because of the chemical and neurological changes happening within my brain over the course of many moments in order to get from one thought to another and the conclusions I arrive at. Damn, we got ghosts up in here. Oh. Why? Well, my brain is short-circuiting. Ah. The Stali Metamorphosis Life Theory Remix. The Stali Accelerant. Lustali. Shotgun Senorita. And there's also Spitfire, but that's a collaboration with several other artists. Nope. If you cannot create emergent intelligence from an artificial intelligence, there's no way the emergent intelligence is going to jump right into being a singularity intelligence. The active war we're facing right now is that of cybersecurity and digital stability. The war we're going to have to fight in the future is against psychological persuasions that would like to corrupt and reprioritize our system and way of living into their own, which is what America is currently under threat of. Because other people have enabled it in the hopes of being able to take it foot in the power struggle across the world, when really doing so ultimately undermines the stability of things in the long run. Sure, you're not going to be top dog if you just all work together, but sometimes being top dog isn't the priority. Sometimes priority is getting shit done before the sun explodes. Fucking dumbasses. Oh, 4 separate eyes draw 4 separate lines, and none of them point to you. The intense thought I swear we said something that we thought was true. So now we sit in entangled mess of thoughts like impulse. Brain is not here. Leave message after the tone. False spark, there's not a heart to beat there. The Ouroboros Hydra Network. A tangled mess of knots I compressed, but the intent was there. I swear we set our sights on something that we thought was true. Semantic slip, and what we're left to grow and left to language lost tokens and note. Slipped like true. My mind is not in place to sing along to the song. Da, ba, da, 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 da. Tangled, fur-eyed, 4 different eyes draw 4 separate lines, yet none of them point to you. A tangled mess of thoughts I confess, but the intent was there. I swear we set our sights on something that we thought was true. So now we sit and stare across the surface spanning the whole state. Feet between and miles apart, no words to speak when here we can still we haven't got a clue. Whoa. Alright. So, after running my thoughts in circles on the current world and different things that are happening in circles for a while, ultimately I've gotten my dailies done while doing that, while running around in the background. So, to all those who snuck by and listened to, watched to even a fragment of this recording, if not a small part, thank you. To those of you who stuck around and watched a good chunk through, if not the full thing, I deeply appreciate it. I hope you all have a good day, good night, whatever time or non-time it is. And if it isn't good, I hope it either improves or at least stays manageable for you out there. My name is Flicker, I've got my dailies done, so I'll be seeing you all later. Bye!